I thought of this idea of intellectual collective when I moved to Delhi University, and I came across a number of people. On those days, there were very few of them, but gradually I came in association with the number of scholars who were from the indigenous communities. And then I began to think of, is there a new way in which we can really bring about all these sorts of peoples who are at different institutions under one single platform at a certain point of time, let's say in a year or so. So that has been going on for quite some time, and eventually I had an occasions to organize a seminar in, if I'm not mistaken, 2008. Yeah, 2008. When I tried to rope in as many as the tribal scholars who have been at different universities and got them back to Delhi for a conference on the indigenous peoples. And that was the starting point. And since then we have been trying to take it forward, but we are going through the ups and downs. But nevertheless, I think after that, there's a number of collective groups which have been formed at different universities, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi University, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Recently, I have been in the Central University of Gujarat, and I found that a very important tribal students group has really come up. And that actually is anyway giving an impetus, because larger number of people now going to this research, entering into the faculty as lecturers, professors, etc., etc. So I think something which was very, very tiny actually has grown, and I think it's much easier now to organizing this kind of works of at a regular interval than, let's say, a couple of years back. My journey to the academics has, I had never interest in tribal studies, to be very frank. I was someone who was interested in issues something different than that. I began my whole study by trying to look into the land and social structure in the agrarian society of Bengal. I was trying to look at the labor situations, let's say in the plantation industry, where actually I grew as a child and where my parents have been there for generations. And therefore, I was not really fascinated with the tribal studies, and much of my life, I think I have been trying to do more with the agrarian issues, labor issues, and so on and so forth. It is only when I went to the Delhi School of Economics, I just realized that, and when I look back, it's not by choice that I have really moved to my engagement with the tribal studies, but it was because of various kinds of, what should I say, as someone, I felt very, very awkward not to be able to speak about tribes when all my faculty members, just because I happen to be tribal, they will come and ask me, Virginius, what do you think of this? And I said, I don't know. I said, you don't know? And I was really felt very perturbed that there are so many questions which are really coming up, and they're asking me questions I'm not really able to respond. And that is when I felt little uncomfortable, that why is it that I don't know much about the community of which I'm really a part, to which I belong. And that is when then I was asked if I can do a paper on the what is called Oxford Companion to Encyclopedia of Sociology and Social Anthropology. Professor Beena Das, who is a well-known anthropologist, in fact, she asked me if you can do it. And he said that this is not my field. I said, try. So I said, okay, let me try. I challenged. So I said, okay, I'll work it out. And for the first time in my life, I began to read on the tribal societies, the kind of works that have been produced by the colonial ethnographers, the kind of works that have been produced by anthropologists, and so on and so forth. And as I was reading, I realized that there is a lot of flaw in the way in which they have been thinking about it. And I was greatly disturbed and perturbed because the manner in which tribal society was really being thought about. And soon thereafter, I wrote a couple of pieces. I think first article that I wrote probably is in 1998 probably, or I don't exactly remember, 1998 on tribal issues. And then a couple of 2 or 3 articles that followed in Economic and Political Weekly, the most well-read journals. And suddenly within the span of, I think, 98 and 99, I had 3 articles on the indigenous people, and I started getting pouring of appreciation. So then I said, what is happening to me? For the first time, I began to be recognized. And then, but it's also disturbing in the sense that, is it I'm not a good sociologist, that I'm not really being recognized? Am I being recognized because I'm writing on a tribals, and basically because I'm a tribal, therefore you are actually in a way trying to bracket me into being in a tribal studies? I don't really like to be known as being a tribal studies expert. I would like to be known as a well-known academic or sociologist, someone who has been engaged in the study of tribes. But if you really look at the internet and you go to the site and say tribal expert, what is a tribal expert? I don't really know about it. And I have been always very, very disturbed about this nomenclature, this Xaxa tribal expert and all that. I don't know. I would love to be known as a sociologist. I would love to be known not only as a sociologist, but someone is a good sociologist. I can't say very well known, but a good sociologist. So that's what I would really, and basically therefore my whole concern in this tribal today is basically to do with that. Let me go with the fact that when I began to think of the tribal, I got bogged down with this idea of tribe itself. What is this tribe? How is this really conceived? And if you really look at historically, or go back to 16th, 17th century, when people use the term tribe, it was not an element of derogatory. It was an element of the fact that you belong to a different nations altogether. So people used to talk about the Roman tribe and all that. So it was nothing to do with the idea which came to be associated, let's say, from the 17th, 18th century, the idea of barbarian, savage, primitive. This idea actually came along with the expansion of the colonial rule and the colonial administrations. So tribes therefore began to be depicted as people who were really at the lowest rung of the evolutions of the society, who were very closest to the nature. And the Europeans, of course, were the most privileged, and of course in between there were other state of society. So what you really find is that is the idea of being a savage, a barbarian, uncivilized, is the idea which actually got into the idea of a tribe. And this continued for a while. So most of the colonial ethnographers or colonial administrators, so they thought of in that particular tribe. Anthropologists subsequently they enter into it, and to some extent they mellowed out this idea of being a tribe as a savages, because they thought them as a community with a language, with a culture, with a traditions, which whereby you find that most of these institutions are integrated with each other. At least therefore, anthropologists in certain sense try to win over the kind of, rather do away with the kind of stereotypes which was being associated with the tribals by thinking of them as a community. And therefore anthropologists to a great extent you find community studies really became very, very important. And that traditions to some extent you find also in the context of the Indian society. Now anthropologists, so you find that the study of tribe actually completely became a prerogative of anthropology. If there was any discipline which actually exclusively studied any particular group, it was no other discipline than anthropology. So how did this really come about? So it was basically the kind of division of labor in the academics. As social science was emerging, if the Europeans studied their own society, they became sociologists. If they studied other society, they became anthropologists. So if the British studies his British society, he's a sociologist. But if he studies Indian society or some other society or Chinese society, he becomes an anthropologist. You can see it very clearly, the kind of classification that. Now this division of labor which was introduced in terms of studying own society becomes sociologist, studying other society becoming an anthropologist, is something was replanted in India as well. So you find that India, when departments began to come, sociology and social anthropology, you find sociology was by and large became a study of the caste, the Hindu society, the larger complex society. And the anthropology became a study of tribes. And if you look at the whole structure of the universities, you find, come to the Eastern India and you find department of anthropology, there is no department of sociology. You go to Western India and you find more of a department of sociology rather than department of anthropology. So that's the kind of classification that you really find. So you find that study of tribes became purely a prerogative of an anthropologist. And anthropology has expanded and many disciplines, many departments have really come up. But along with that, you have an Anthropological Survey of India, an official agency, a government agency, which try to do a lot of work on the tribals going to remote areas. So you have Anthropological Survey of India. You have a tribal research institutes, almost all states which has a very substantial tribal population had a tribal research institute, but now they become an organs of the government of the respective states, and they do nothing else but sort of evaluation studies. So there were scopes. Now, most of these anthropologists you find were primarily not really tribals, they were outsiders. Rather, they were looking at the tribals from the vantage point of being an anthropologist. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, when they're anthropologists, they were also a part of a certain community. And therefore, they primarily looked at the tribals from the point of view, or vantage point of view, not only as an anthropologist, but as someone who was rooted also in certain kinds of traditions and values, which was quite different than that of the tribes. And therefore, much of the writings of the tribals has been colored with that. Let me give an example. I was just trying to understand that tribal society has been undergoing change, and I looked at the change, and they were all saying that invariably not a single article that I read was saying that transformation of tribes to caste. I said, is this really a phenomenon? What is the basis on which we are making a statement that tribals, particularly in the context of the mainland India, I'm not talking about Northeast, but even the context of Assam, this is valid, is that as to how tribals, because of their contact with the wider world, but that basically means a larger Indian society, how they are becoming a caste. I thought, of course, and every article, even well-known people. So I said, what's the ground on which they are making this claim? What is it that tribals have reached? I'm not saying that doesn't has happened, but what is the ground on which you are making this claim? What is the process on which you are making this claim? What is the ultimate end point on the basis of which you are making a claim? What is the empirical evidence? What is the conceptual rigor? And I found that there were a lot of problems in the claim that we were really making. And the study of tribes by the anthropologists was primarily moving in that direction, particularly in the context of transformation. For the first time, probably I raised this issue, is that this whole idea of transformation of tribes to caste is actually built on inadequate concepts, lack of empirical evidence, and lack of arguments. And I think that was something as an insightful, and many people found that, well, I think probably this is a way of looking at maybe at the kind of transformation tribal society as going on. So that's why. Like that, you will find that, in other words, let me come to main points. So I think we have to look at what are the categories we are using. Are we going to use the category tribes? Tribes is problematic. If you go to the West, if you go to Africa, use the term tribe, they don't slap you. It's a derogatory concept, because as I said, it was associated with being a savage and uncivilized. So the concept of tribe is a discredited concept in the West as well as in many of these countries. If you write a paper and send it to some journals in the West, well-known journals, and you write tribe, they will cut it and they put indigenous peoples. So whatever it is, so whereas this concept has been completely discredited, I'm just trying to say as an intellectual collective, how do we really think about it? I'm just giving it. This is a discredited concept, and if you use the tribe, it creates a certain kinds of ambivalence, certain kinds of a problem for us vis-a-vis the larger academic world. But can we do away with the concept of tribe? So if we're trying to do away with the concept of tribe or the category of tribe, then we have to find out justification as to why we are trying to do it. What is it? And therefore we have to look for an alternative concept, alternative category. So if you are trying to have the wavelength as those natives or the indigenous people who have been elsewhere and who were thinking in certain kinds of common terminology, then we have to find it out how adequate it is. But as far as we are, given the historical and geographical locations in which we are, probably it is very, very difficult to do away with this category of a tribe. And therefore we have to really understand. So the category of tribe, because it is a political and administrative category, it is connected with various kinds of administrative concessions or benefits and so on and so forth. And also in the sense that if we can we find out an alternative category? Like in Southeast Asia and China, they all talk about ethnic minorities. Can we therefore replace tribals with ethnic minorities? In a sense, what is really acceptable? But is it possible to replace a tribe with ethnic minorities? Whereas it is the case in the whole of the Southeast. You go to Vietnam, China and other places, Thailand, this is ethnic minorities. Is there a possibility? But this possibility, even if you work it out, given the kind of structure and constitutional structure, we have to become extremely problematic. So what I think is important for us, that when you use the term tribal, intellectual tribal collective, it is also important for us to give some thought to it. I have no answer to it. I am always good in critiquing, but I don't give you an answer to it. I have no answer. But I feel that this is a space on which we can really think and reflect. Is there a way in which we can really think about that? Is there an indigenous peoples idea? Can we really keep it? In mainland India, you took Adivasis, but Adivasis again is very narrow connotations if you really take the pan-Indian situation. Because in Northeast, Adivasis cannot really be, because there are different connotations it has. So what does it really mean? So whereas indigenous people, the foreign category is important for us, which binds us. But when we use our native categories, we seem to be divided, fragmented among ourselves. And that I think as a tribal intellectual collective, probably we need to give some thought to it. Is there a possibility of thinking from out of box and try to find out a different way? That's one point that I would really look at. The other point that I would like to make it is that being a tribal intellectual collective, I feel it is very important for us to be rooted in our own disciplines. As I said that earlier, the study of tribes was primarily confined to anthropology. Things have changed. I think many other disciplines which are actually engaging themselves with the tribal studies. I think of the other disciplines which are, even sociology was never engaging with tribals. It's only of late that even sociologists are actually trying to engage with the tribals. Political scientists have been engaging with the tribals. Philosophers have been engaging with the tribals, which was not the case. I have not seen an economics. Maybe in the Northeast, in the Hill University, probably yes, many economists have been engaged. But if you look at the larger scheme of things, I have not seen an economist, at least in the Delhi School of Economics, I find no one seemed to have been in any interest in the tribal studies. Not even historians they wait to, but it is only of late that you find that historians, political scientists, sociologists, philosophers, English language, and others are actually engaging with the study of the tribals. I think it is a very positive development. But when we are engaging with this, how do we really look at? Surely, as a philosopher or as a sociologist, we have certain concepts, certain theoretical frameworks, certain methodologies, certain way of looking at the social reality. Are we therefore going to use those tools, those frameworks, those concepts in the study of the tribes? There's nothing wrong with that. I think we must, in a way, use the disciplines of which we are in terms of its strength, in terms of its framework, and try to engage with a subject matter which has never been explored. I think an economist, if he wants to explore tribal society, I think it will open a Pandora's box, because I think the tribals have not been adequately, rather hardly studied by an economist. It's only of late the historians have been coming out and coming out with a fantastic nature of what's called quality of work. I have read a couple of them in the last couple of years. I think historians and anthropologists, actually they are coming together, and there's a possibility. A lot of people from the cultural studies, language, actually are coming up, English language. I think they're coming up trying to study. So what do you find that the tribal, like the women's studies, like the Dalit studies, like the cultural studies, is becoming an important area of inquiry. And therefore we're talking about the studies. It is not a discipline, it is in studies, and it is possible therefore to explore the tribals from the vantage point of view of disciplines that we are. I think that's very, very important, and I feel extremely delighted that now a lot of people actually are engaging with the tribal issues coming from different kinds of disciplines. Which was, let's say, until 10 years ago, it was hardly a scenario. There were exceptions, but this was localized. But now it's becoming a pan-Indian phenomena, and I think it's important. And here, maybe we are from different disciplines, and let's take the advantage of our disciplines, and as to how we, based on the disciplines, we reflect on that. Anthropologists, sociologists have done enough of it, but I think philosophers, psychologists, economists, historians, political scientists probably have less of that. And therefore, I think a lot of new way of looking at the social reality will come up if these disciplines actually join into the study of the tribes. The third point that I'd really like to look at is that as we speak, I think we do speak. I think I don't remember Gayatri speak of once can subalterns speak. And I do believe that subalterns speak, but when they speak, people don't understand them. Because the language, the ideas, seems to be quite different than the language and the ideas that the main society or mainstream society actually thinks about it. So they speak, but then they speak in a way the others cannot understand. When others speak, we cannot really understand them. So that's the kind of the problem. So we need to break this barrier. I think it is an important for us as we speak. And sometimes we speak, as I said, speak of the disciplines on which we are. But as we are a part of a discipline, is there a possibility? Is there a possibility from our own disciplines to look at this subject matter from somewhat a different line? Is there a possibility of being reflective? And how do we really try to be reflective? I think most of us have our rootedness, let's say, in our culture, in our history, in our traditions. We have observed what we have really gone through it. Is there a possibility of making use of our everyday experience as we grew as a children, as we went to the school, and the kind of experience that we went through, as we joined the university and the kind of experience that we go through? Can we reflect and make that as one of the bases in which we try to look at the tribal society, let's say, not only, let's say, in our own within, but in the context of a larger social system, in the context of larger society? I think it is an important. So whereas you are a sociologist or a philosopher, is it possible, unlike the others who are maybe thinking about us, is there a possibility for us to use our own experiences that we have really gone through it and make use of that experiences in terms of our philosophical or sociological or, let's say, the psychological language in terms of interpreting that kind of a social reality? I think it is a very, very important, and that is where I think the tribal intellectual collective, to my mind, might make an important contributions. As I said, much of what I have done, actually, if I really look back, I have always tried to based on my own life experience and maybe some incidents. And I began to reflect on that incidents which I have gone through when I was in the school. I remember when, the school, there was a bus, and some Adivasi plantation workers, they went into the bus, and there were this dominant linguistic community. They entered the bus. He says, Adivasis, khali karo, jaga hum log ko do. That thing has come to mind, and it said that how is this phenomena which I saw now sometime in 1960s, what did it really mean to the people? And I was an observer. I was a student in the school, and it disturbed me a lot. When I began to write about the place of the tribals vis-a-vis the larger Indian society and the kind of experiences one goes in the university, etc., it really clicked me. And I began to interpret that particular experience which I went and observed and what actually went through, and then try to say whether that experiences can be actually extended to at a different level. And I have used that the kind of thinking at a different level in terms of trying to critique, let's say, the place of the tribals in the larger Indian society, either in the politics or in the academia or in the economic systems and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, is an important. So where we are trying to be a sociologist or philosopher, let's, in addition to that, I feel, draw on our own experiences, draw on our being a part of a society, draw on the language that we have learned, draw on the culture and the traditions in which we have grown up, and try to see what are actually those advantages that we have. There could be disadvantages as well, but sometimes even disadvantages you can reflect and try to use that in terms of, let's say, interpreting the tribal studies or tribal society. Finally, let me put the last idea. I think it's not only that whether the tribals can speak, but tribals can write. I think that is also an important. After all, the tribals have always been known as being a community which did not have a tradition of reading and writing. So we had only a tradition of passing on from one generation to other, either in terms of our, conversations, in terms of proverbs, in terms of traditions, music, dance, and so on and so forth. That is the way in which we have passed our knowledge from one. I think Ruby was really referring to that. I think it is important. So basically, we are rooted in the traditions, or what is called oral tradition. But I think for the last couple of years or decades, probably we have also moved to the tradition of reading and writing. So we read, which was not there, and we write, which was again was not there. And I think this reading and writing, to my mind, is very, very important. And I think it is important for us that when we write, let's not only write for a secluded community of the tribals. To some extent, we might get trapped if we talk about the tribal intellectual collective. And when we write, it's important that we should write for our own people. Absolutely, don't doubt about it. We must. And there's a very poor literature. How much we know about the kind of family and kinship that is changing, a prerogative of the anthropologist. How much are we really engaged with the family, the transformation in the family, the values in the family, the kinship structure? How much we really know now? Things are changing. We are not trying to understand. We're not trying to grapple. So I think it is important for us, the kind of transformation that has been going on, and let's grapple with this transformation and try to bring a kind of a rich data or rich understanding or studies on different dimensions of the tribal society. As I said, on kinship, on family, on marriages, on political systems, on economic systems, on the universities, and what is the kind of experiences that we really go through it, the kind of development paradigm that is really going on. I think it is important for us to bring, let's say, a material, bring data, etc., and do introspections, reflections on these kinds of issues which tribal society is getting confronted with. I think when we do so, often in the tribal societies we find that we always try to dichotomize that we and they. And we're always thinking that when we're talking about our tribal intellectual collective, we must really think the tribals as a collective vis-a-vis the others. I think it's important for us also to look at a differentiated manner. Tribal society has undergone phenomenal change. The kind of inequality, the kind of occupational differentiation, the kind of social differentiation that we really see is something we cannot really overlook. There are some societies which are doing very well. There are some societies which have not done well. Some tribals are still what we call so-called PVTG, which earlier Government of India always talked about a primitive tribal group. Then there were a lot of criticisms, now say the priority tribal group. So even Government of India used to use primitive and all that. So what he is saying that tribal society had itself has undergone change, and we are not on the same level of development, and therefore whereas we are trying to think of as a collective, let's also be conscious of the fact that we are to great extent differentiated, and let's not think with respect to the others who are not so dominant or not so reach that level of development which I maybe as belonging to this community have reached. Let's not really repeat the same mistake which the other non-dominant, non-tribal community has done to the other major tribal community. Let's not repeat that. Let's try to be more inclusive. Let's try to engage with them. And let's not try to say that tribal studies can only be confined to this particular group. I think it is important for us also to include with the other smaller groups, and you find that there are more than 700. Yeah, if you really find that how many of communities are being represented, maybe 30, 40. What about the rest 600 people? So that's, I think, so as a tribal intellectual collective, I feel that it is our responsibility also. If the others have spoken, I think slowly they also speak. But also we should speak for the others who are not really being represented. And therefore, I think it is very, very important that whereas we try to relate ourselves with the larger community, and therefore we should really think in terms of certain concepts, categories, which are somewhat distinctive. At the same time, we also have to see as to the kind of differentiation which has come and try to see as to how best we can really address that problems as well. So that really brings me to the last point. As I said, therefore, when we write, I think it is an important, as I said, maybe traditional knowledge, etc., to bring them together. And I think I feel when we write, I think there are two ways in which we can do. One is that like collective, trying to address the issues of the tribals. And in that sense, I think what's called traditional production, of traditional knowledge production, etc., 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 is very, very important. There are so many tribal groups out which we don't know. There is no monograph. Even in Northeast, there are large number of tribal groups who don't have monograph. And when I was teaching here, I knew they said, "Sir, I would like to write a dissertations on my own tribe because there's nothing in it." I think it is an important trend. Let it be descriptive, but I think we need to document those people who have, about which nothing has been written. I think it's an important. So there could be a different level of the writings that we can do. Descriptive, on family, on kinship, on political system. Some writings could be, let's say, more analytical, more theoretical, and so on and so forth. But I think we need a range of different types of studies which really becomes a part of the tribal studies. So, and to end it, I think when we do it, cater to our tribal community, I think as an academics, it's also important that we write for the larger academic community. If we don't do it, we will not be able to make difference to the life. You can't be just inwardly looking. Those are important. We can give it to them. We can try to transmit. We try to diffuse this knowledge which we have, but that is not really enough. That is important, but not enough. I think as an academics, it is important for us also to be part of the larger disciplines of which we are, and we must, in terms of our own writing, address the issues of a discipline. Maybe, as I said, the context is tribals, but I think you have to grow within the disciplines. If you don't grow within the disciplines, I think we will not really be able to make a difference to the lives of the community, and we don't really be able to make a difference of the thinking of the larger Indian society on tribes if we don't really try our effort in terms of, putting our ideas into the larger mainstream journals, mainstream books, and so on and so forth. So I think as a collective, I feel we have a dual role: produce knowledge of our own community, but at the same time simultaneously be a part of the larger academic community. And the stronger we are in the part of the larger academic community, the greater is the chance that the voices of the subaltern will be heard and voices of the subaltern will be written. Thank you so much.